After a full year away, the landowner's return began with a quiet drive through the outskirts of the town he once knew so well. The road, familiar yet strangely altered, unfolded before him in long stretches of freshly paved asphalt, new street signs, and clusters of recently constructed homes. His year-long absence had been intentional, a break from a life overwhelmed by family disputes, legal tangles, and the slow suffocation that came from living under the constant scrutiny of the local HOA. The land he owned, several acres of untouched property nestled on the edge of the community, had always been his sanctuary, a space he kept undeveloped despite countless offers and pressures to sell. Leaving it behind had been difficult, but necessary. Now, as he neared the gravel path that marked the beginning of his land, a deep unease settled in his stomach. What he expected to find was the same quiet terrain he'd left behind. Dense trees, rolling grass, and the familiar contours of a landscape untouched by development. Instead, what rose before him was something entirely different, something impossible, something outrageous. The first glimpse was a bright roofline peeking through the trees where none should have been. Then, as he turned onto the widened entrance road, his jaw tightened. The gravel he remembered was gone, replaced by an elegant stone driveway lined with trimmed hedges, decorative lighting, and freshly planted flowers. On both sides stood towering mansions. Massive, gleaming structures with modern architecture, landscaped yards, stone facades, and designs that screamed prestige. These were not temporary constructions, nor were they small improvements. They were fully built luxury homes complete with wide porches, multi-car garages, and high-end finishing touches. Every single one of them was sitting on land he owned. He parked his truck at the edge of what used to be his open field and stepped out slowly, absorbing the sheer audacity of what he saw. An entire neighborhood, an upscale extension of the HOA-run community, had been constructed without his knowledge or permission. There were at least 7 mansions visible from where he stood, each aligned in an organized pattern as though the HOA had taken a blueprint and played God with it. The wind carried faint sounds of construction still ongoing in the distance, suggesting the project wasn't even finished yet. The transformation was too extensive, too deliberate, too meticulously planned for this to be a mistake. For a moment, he considered the possibility that he had taken a wrong turn, that perhaps the boundaries of his land had been altered by the town, or that somehow he was mistaken. But his property lines were ingrained in his memory. These homes, these asphalt drives, these sculpted lawns, they were unquestionably built on his land. As he walked deeper into the development, he noticed small markers staked into the ground, each bearing the HOA emblem. They bore words like a phase 2 landscaping, a future community park, and a pedestrian walkway. The HOA had not only built homes, they had redesigned the entire region with long-term planning in mind. His land had become their crown jewel project. The deeper he walked, the clearer the situation became. This was not an accident. This was not confusion about ownership. This was an organized takeover, a complete appropriation of land HOA had always come. He remembered the way they used to look at his undeveloped acreage, the way the board members insisted it was a wasted potential, the way they pushed for uniformity and expansion. They had wanted it for years, and now, during his absence, they had taken it. He approached one of the mansions, noticing finishing materials still stacked in the driveway, suggesting it had only recently been completed. Through the large windows, he could see furniture inside, expensive pieces, carefully staged as though real estate photos had been taken earlier that week. This wasn't just construction. These homes had been sold or were in the process of being sold. People were meant to live here. Buyers likely had no idea the land wasn't owned by the HOA, nor that the project was built on a foundation of illegal occupancy. The thought stirred a slow, simmering anger within him. The HOA, known for fining people over mailbox colors and lawn height, had committed a massive violation, one that could cost them everything. But anger wasn't the only thing forming in his mind. Beneath the frustration, a calculating thought began to surface. This wasn't just a disaster, it was an opportunity. The scope of their mistake was enormous. They had built million-dollar homes on land that wasn't theirs. They had invested resources, time, and money into infrastructure they didn't own. They had likely taken out loans, passed community votes, and used HOA funds to create a project built entirely on stolen ground. He realized with a slow, dawning clarity that the AA, in their arrogance, had placed themselves in a position where they could lose far more than they imagined. As he walked toward the center of the development, he noticed a large billboard showing a rendered map of what they called the estates at Willow Ridge. A glossy representation of future homes, private parks, clubhouses, and walking paths covered the display. Every inch of it stood on land that had always belonged to him, legally protected, documented, and recorded. The more he examined the details, the more he realized how deeply entangled the HOA had become. Contractors, investors, buyers, lenders, all connected to a project built on property they never had permission to touch. He stood silently for a long moment, staring at the billboard as the truth settled into place. The HOA had created a ticking time bomb with their own hands, and they didn't even know it. And now that he was back, he was the one holding the match. The first steps of his plan were forming already, but he knew this was only the beginning. The chaos that would unfold would reshape everything the HOA thought they controlled. He turned back toward the first mansion, the wind carrying the faint hum of construction deeper in the property, and prepared for the storm he was about to unleash. The morning after his return began with a calmness that did not reflect the storm building beneath the surface. He woke early, driven by a focused determination that replaced last night's shock. The previous evening had been about absorbing the reality of what the HOA had done. Today would be about gathering evidence, silently, carefully, methodically. He knew that if he approached this impulsively, the HOA would scramble, deny, or attempt to cover their tracks. But if he moved with precision, they would expose themselves fully before they ever realized he had returned. He started by walking the perimeter of his land, tracing property lines he'd memorized long ago. Despite the HOA attempts to reshape the land, the original markers still stood in some places, old survey posts, iron stakes buried in the soil, and tree markings from the last official boundary assessment. What he found confirmed everything from yesterday. Not an inch of this new development extended onto HOA-owned land. They had built entirely on his acreage, hundreds of feet into his property, across several acres that had always been documented under his name. As he inspected the boundaries, he began photographing everything. The markers, the homes, the roads, the pathways, and even the construction crews working deeper inside the development. He kept a respectful distance, appearing like nothing more than a curious passerby. No one questioned him. The workers assumed he was a new homeowner or a buyer casually exploring the area. This gave him all the freedom he needed. He walked slowly, capturing angles that proved the homes were built squarely within his land's legal borders. He photographed the utility hookups being installed, the sewer pipes crossing onto his territory, and the electrical lines already connected to the city grid, all without authorization from him. He even filmed short clips of construction supervisors discussing upcoming deadlines, footage that would become valuable later. After completing his initial documentation, he returned to his truck and drove into town. His destination was the county clerk's office, a place he hadn't stepped into in years. Inside, he found familiarity, worn floors, old file cabinets, and staff members who remembered him from previous visits. He requested the most recent building permits for the estates at Willow Ridge and watched the clerk sift through digital records. When she finally looked up, confusion flickered across her face. There were no permits under that project name. None had been filed for that section of land. None had been approved. The only permits listed for the HOA were minor renovation approvals, roofing, porch extensions, window replacements, nothing related to large-scale construction. He kept a neutral expression, acting merely curious as though it meant little to him. But inside, a new layer of the situation came into focus. Not only had the HOA built on land they didn't own, they had built without county authorization. Every structure was illegal from the foundation up. This wasn't just a lawsuit waiting to happen. It was a catastrophic breach that could result in fines, demolitions, and criminal charges. After leaving the clerk's office, he made another stop, the County Land Records Department. He requested a full property map printout along with confirmation of ownership. The official document, stamped and certified, clearly outlined his acreage, untouched, unchanged, never transferred. His legal claim was ironclad. With the documents in hand, he drove back toward the development, but this time he approached it from a different angle. He parked near the main entrance where the HOA had installed a large, elegant stone sign announcing the estates at Willow Ridge a premium TA community. He observed every detail, noting how boldly they branded the project as their own. They hadn't merely pushed a boundary, they had claimed full ownership. As he quietly recorded video footage of the sign, a feeling began to settle in his mind. Not anger anymore, but a cold, steady resolve. Though HOA had spent enormous sums building these mansions, completing infrastructure, hiring landscapers, contractors, designers, and marketers, they had poured community funds into branding, roadwork, utilities, and promotional material. All of it sat on land he controlled. The power imbalance was staggering. They thought they owned this place, but legally they owned nothing. He continued deeper into the development, observing families touring completed homes with real estate agents. Couples admired kitchens through the windows. Agents described luxury amenities, private parks, and HOA benefits with glowing enthusiasm. Buyers listened with curiosity, unaware that they were walking through homes that might legally belong to him. Or worse, might face demolition if the truth came out too quickly. He recorded everything. Every open house flyer, every promotional sign, every real estate banner. He needed proof not only of construction but of commercial activity, transactions involving property the HOA had no right to sell. As he walked, he noticed one further detail that made the situation even more precarious for the HOA. Some of the mansions were already occupied. Cars sat in driveways, mail filled the boxes, and signs of daily life were unmistakable. The HOA had let people move in. That meant contracts had been signed, keys exchanged, and money paid. These homeowners were innocent victims caught in the middle of a far greater mess, completely unaware that the land beneath their luxury homes belonged to someone else. The more he learned, the more strategic he became. This wasn't a situation to expose immediately. If he confronted the HOA now, they would scramble, pull the project back, or attempt to negotiate from a defensive position. But if he waited, let them build more, let them sell more homes, let them commit further, his leverage would multiply. They would place themselves deeper into a hole they'd never escape. By allowing their own arrogance to continue unchallenged, they would seal their fate. When he finally returned to his truck, his phone was filled with hundreds of photos, dozens of videos, recorded statements, legal boundaries, county records, and undeniable proof of wrongdoing. But he wasn't ready to reveal his presence yet. Instead, he drove past the HOA office, noticing only a few cars outside. It was quiet, unsuspecting, completely unaware of the storm forming just beyond their polished doors. What none of them knew was that the landowner they thought had disappeared was back. He had returned not as a passive neighbor, but as the rightful owner of everything they had illegally built. And soon enough, the HOA would learn that their proudest project was constructed atop the biggest mistake in their history. As he drove home, planning each next step, a new chapter of the unfolding disaster was already taking shape, one that would push the HOA into a corner they could never escape. The following days unfolded with unsettling quiet, the kind that disguises chaos brewing beneath a polished surface. While the HOA flaunted their new luxury development with confident pride, the landowner spent his time peeling back the layers of their operation with the precision of a surgeon exposing a hidden infection. Every morning began with a silent inspection of the mansions rising across his acreage, documenting the trucks arriving, contractors signing logs, and landscaping teams shaping the terrain as though the land had always belonged to them. By now, he had established a pattern: arrive early, blend in with workers or prospective buyers, observe, and leave without raising suspicion. The HOA members and board leaders had no idea he was back in town, and that ignorance was his greatest tactical advantage. In their minds, he was still gone, absent, unreachable, irrelevant. But the deeper he looked, the more he realized the HOA bold project wasn't just illegal. It was unstable. The third morning after his return, he parked farther from the site, choosing a vantage point overlooking the private cul-de-sac the HOA had carved into the center of his land. From here, he could see nearly all the mansions in a single sweeping view. It was an impressive scene on the surface: high-end architecture, manicured greenery, and a design clearly intended to attract wealthy residents. But beneath the outward beauty, structural faults were beginning to appear. Some were literal. He noticed a large section of pavement cracking near the newest homes, where the soil had shifted after heavy machinery dug too close to underground water tables. Improper grading had created drainage issues, causing water to pool behind one mansion's foundation. Workers seemed perplexed as they tried to fix it, unaware that the problem stemmed from the HOA failure to obtain proper geological surveys. He took photos of every detail. This wasn't just poor planning, it was negligence layered on top of illegal construction. But the structural flaws were only the beginning. As he gathered more information, the financial cracks became even more revealing. Late that afternoon, he visited the bank where the HOA kept its development funds. He had contacts there, former acquaintances who remembered him well. Though he couldn't access private accounts, he could inquire casually about local construction loans or developer financing associated with the new project. The bank officer hesitated when he mentioned the development's name. There was a She couldn't disclose details, but she mentioned generally that some projects had been approved with unusually aggressive timelines and incomplete land verification. Her tone made it clear she had concerns, though she couldn't legally elaborate. He didn't press. He didn't need specifics yet. Just knowing the HOA had obtained funding based on unverified land claims confirmed they'd woven themselves into an even deeper trap. By the time he left the bank, the pieces were forming in his mind like a puzzle snapping together. The HOA had expanded beyond their means, overextended themselves financially, and relied on fraudulent claims of land ownership to secure loans they weren't qualified for. Their pride had driven them straight into a financial disaster. Now, with the development nearly complete, they were trapped in commitments they couldn't walk back. And he held the key to exposing all of it. That evening, he returned to the development one more time, moving through the neighborhood like a ghost. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the mansions, and warm lights flickered on inside homes that had already been sold. Children played in one driveway, their parents completely unaware that the ground under their new home legally belonged to a stranger. The landowner paused, watching with a heavy silence. He didn't blame the buyers. They were victims in this too. They had trusted a system that failed them. His conflict was with the HOA board, the ones who orchestrated the entire project, who gambled with other people's lives, finances, and dreams for their own pride and expansion. As he moved through the cul-de-sac, he spotted several HOA members gathered near a large boardroom-style tent erected at the center of the development. Their voices carried faintly through the night air. Though he couldn't hear every word, the tone was sharp, tense. Papers were spread across a table, blueprints, schedules, expense sheets, all illuminated by a portable lamp. He remained hidden behind a row of hedges, watching. The HOA president stood at the head of the table, pointing aggressively at documents while the others exchanged looks of concern. One member rubbed his forehead with frustration. Another tapped her foot with nervous impatience. Something was wrong, something big. Their composure was slipping. He moved closer, careful to stay out of sight. Snippets of conversation drifted through the air, mentions of missing funds, delayed inspections, contractor disputes, ballooning costs, and unexpected fines from the county. The OA had tried to force the project into existence too quickly, and now everything they had rushed was unraveling. Their desperation was unmistakable. They were losing control, and they had no idea the true disaster was still waiting quietly in the shadows. Later, when the agent entered and the members dispersed, he stepped into the now empty tent, scanning the papers they had left behind. Most were harmless schedules and landscaping plans, but one document caught his eye: an internal report detailing projected revenue from home sales, expected HOA fee increases, and estimated profit margins from the expansion. None of the data made sense without land ownership. And more importantly, the HOA board had signed this report, certifying the accuracy of information that was completely false. He photographed every page quickly, knowing it would serve as damning evidence later. By the time he returned to his truck, the gravity of the situation weighed heavily on him. The HOA hadn't merely overreached. They had crossed legal, financial, and ethical boundaries so recklessly that their entire organization was at risk of collapse. His return wasn't just a personal battle anymore. It had become the unraveling of a powerful institution that had grown arrogant enough to believe they were untouchable. As he drove back toward town, a quiet certainty settled over him. The cracks within the HOA were widening fast, and with every passing day, their mansion empire was sinking deeper into a mess they wouldn't escape. And soon those cracks would break open completely. By the fourth morning of his return, the landowner woke with a clearer vision than ever before. The chaos he had uncovered within the illegal construction, financial strain, hidden defects, and fraudulent permits was only the surface of a far larger opportunity. While the HOA believed they were shaping a flourishing luxury community, he understood the truth. They had built their empire on sand, and he now held the power to determine whether the entire structure collapsed or stood under new terms entirely decided by him. The advantage he possessed wasn't merely legal ownership, it was timing. For a year, the HOA had worked tirelessly, believing their expansion to be a triumph. They'd invested everything, funds, pride, reputation, into this land. And in doing so, they'd unknowingly placed themselves in a position where retreat was impossible. They had burned bridges with contractors by forcing unrealistic deadlines, drained reserves to fast-track construction, and publicly celebrated their new phase with bold announcements that now tied their credibility to the project. If he moved too soon, the HOA might still salvage something, pull back, negotiate from strength, or attempt to manipulate public perception. But if he waited just long enough, let them tighten the noose with their own decisions, they would have no leverage left. Their entire future depended on land they didn't own, and that was the advantage he would use. After breakfast, he returned to the development to continue his quiet assessment. The workers recognized him by now, giving casual nods as he walked through the construction zone. He carried himself with the confident ease of someone who belonged there, never drawing attention. It was that natural presence, calm, observant, that allowed him to slip unnoticed through the growing tension around the site. Today, he focused on something new, the internal infrastructure. He knew that to fully understand the scope of their vulnerability, he needed more than property lines and financial records. He needed to know how the HOA operated, its hierarchy, its rules, its blind spots, and, most importantly, its weaknesses. Every HOA had them. Some were political rivalries among board members. Others were financial mismanagement hidden under layers of bureaucracy. Some were power struggles, disputes over authority, unpaid contractors, or disgruntled residents. And with a development this large, the HOA would be juggling all of it. As he observed the workers from a distance, he noticed a white SUV pull into the site. The vehicle bore an HOA emblem on the door, a symbol he had come to associate with arrogance and entitlement. 4 board members stepped out and began walking toward the nearly completed clubhouse structure at the center of the development. He followed discreetly along a parallel path, staying behind construction barriers and stacks of materials. The board members entered the clubhouse shell, a large building framed in steel and concrete. The walls weren't complete yet, leaving enough openings for him to quietly approach the rear side, where he could hear their voices echo through the unfinished interior. From his vantage point, he listened closely. Their conversation quickly revealed more than he expected. The board was arguing not just mild disagreements, but tense, whisper-shouted conflicts about finances and deadlines. One member pressed another for answers about missing invoices. So, another complained about contractors demanding additional payments after discovering mistakes in the foundational layout. Someone mentioned that buyers were becoming impatient, asking for move-in dates the HOA couldn't guarantee. Then came the most revealing line. If we don't finalize the last loan this week, we won't have enough to finish Phase 3. Phase 3. Another expansion, more construction, more expenses, more dependence on land they didn't legally possess. He held back a quiet breath as the weight of that information settled in his mind. The HOA wasn't just stretched thin, they were drowning. They were gambling every remaining resource on land that belonged to him. Every step they took tied their future more tightly to his silence. Every dollar they spent increased the cost of their eventual collapse or submission. The more they built, the more powerless they became. After the board members left, he walked into the clubhouse and inspected the interior. He took photos of structural beams, wiring layouts, plumbing connections, all evidence of ongoing construction that had progressed far beyond what could ever be easily reversed. The HOA had no ability to undo this. That was the core of his advantage. As he exited the clubhouse, he noticed a small pile of documents carelessly left on a work table. He scanned through them quickly. Material orders, revised blueprints, and a printed email between HOA members discussing delays. But one sheet stood out above the rest, a copy of an internal HOA meeting agenda outlining a vote scheduled for next week. The topic? A proposal to allocate emergency reserve funds to the Willow Ridge expansion. He read the line twice. Emergency reserves. The HOA was planning to drain their safety net to keep the project alive. The desperation was more severe than he expected. This single decision would push them past the point of recovery. They were willing to risk everything. Every homeowner's dues, every dollar of saved funds to finish a project built illegally. And once those reserves were gone, the HOA would be trapped with no lifeline, no fallback, and no ability to defend themselves legally. When he left the clubhouse, the magnitude of his position settled over him. He wasn't fighting against a powerful organization. He was walking through the ruins of one that didn't yet realize it was collapsing. His unseen advantage was simple but devastating. Every day the HOA continued building, they made his position stronger. Every decision they made pushed them deeper into his control. Every dollar they spent became leverage they couldn't take back. That evening, he returned home and began organizing the evidence he had gathered. He sorted photos chronologically, linked videos to specific dates, attached commentary to boundary maps, and cataloged every piece of documentation from contractors, county offices, and HOA meetings. What he was assembling wasn't merely proof. It was a case so ironclad that no judge, no HOA lawyer, and no board member could dispute it. And when the time came to reveal the truth, the HOA would understand the full weight of their mistake. But not yet. The landowner closed his laptop, leaned back in his chair, and let the quiet of the night settle around him. Tomorrow would mark a shift in the balance, a subtle move that would start tightening the net around the HOA. The advantage was his, and now he would start using it. By the fifth morning of his return, the slow unraveling of the HOA had reached a point where even an outsider could sense the tension radiating from the development. Workers spoke in low, frustrated tones. Trucks arrived late or not at all. Supplies that once flowed steadily were now held up by delays the HOA couldn't explain. But the landowner understood exactly what was happening. The HOA finances were stretched so thin that even minor issues rippled through the entire operation. Payment disputes, unapproved modifications, and the looming vote to raid emergency funds had created an invisible pressure that pushed everyone involved into a state of anxiety. Yet, to anyone else passing through the development, the chaos remained hidden beneath a polished surface. Fresh paint gleamed on mansion walls. Sod rolled neatly across lawns. Model homes looked immaculate under the morning sun. But behind the exterior, cracks were spreading faster than anyone realized. This was the perfect moment for him to begin applying pressure. His advantage was already solid. Now he needed to slowly, deliberately increase the strain until the HOA could no longer maintain the illusion of control. He began the day by returning to the county clerk's office, this time with a different purpose. Instead of asking about permits, he inquired about upcoming inspections. The clerk checked her records, revealing a list of scheduled site reviews for utilities, safety compliance, and final home certifications. Several of the homes were due for inspection that week. He scanned the list briefly, noting addresses and times. Then he made a polite request to place a landowner observation notice on file regarding his property. The clerk raised an eyebrow but processed the request without question. The notice wasn't a complaint. It didn't accuse the HOA of any. It simply stated that the legal owner of the land intended to be present during upcoming inspections to observe and verify property boundaries. County protocol allowed it. Such a request was rare but not suspicious, and it didn't alert the HOA at all. Not yet. But when inspectors arrived to evaluate the homes, they would find him standing there with a certified land map and documented proof of ownership. The moment the county learned the homes were on private land, a mandatory freeze could be triggered. Construction could be halted. Approvals could be revoked. And the HOA would be blindsided. He left the office feeling the first shift in momentum. The clock had begun ticking. That afternoon, he walked through the development with renewed purpose. His observations were sharper now, his awareness more attuned to the signs of mounting strain. Near one mansion, he noticed a contractor pacing nervously while speaking on the phone. His gestures were wide, agitated. Clearly, the discussion wasn't going well. Workers leaned against their trucks, waiting idle time that cost money the HOA no longer had. Farther down the cul-de-sac, landscapers bickered over which areas to finish first. They had orders from the HOA to prioritize properties scheduled for tours, but without clear direction, the teams were confused and irritated. The landowner moved silently through the chaos, absorbing every detail. He didn't interfere. He didn't announce himself. He let the HOA instability expose itself naturally. As he walked past the partially completed clubhouse, he saw a new sign posted on an easel out front. A community open house weekend. Tour the new estates. He stared at the sign for a long moment. The arrogance behind that decision astonished him. The HOA wasn't just pretending everything was fine. They were doubling down, opening the development to the public as if nothing were wrong. Dozens of prospective buyers would soon walk through illegally built homes. Agents would offer tours. Contracts would be discussed. Promises would be made. And none of them realized that the very ground beneath them was the HOA greatest liability. The more people the HOA pulled into this mess, the worse it would be for them when the truth finally surfaced. And he intended to ensure the truth surfaced at precisely the right moment. Near the clubhouse entrance, he found another group of board members in conversation, different from the earlier group he'd watched, but equally tense. They huddled close, speaking in rushed tones, their eyes scanning paperwork clipped to a binder. They edged closer, remaining behind the shade of a pillar. Their conversation drifted through the air, fragmented but revealing. They discussed rising complaints from contractors about unpaid invoices. They referenced the emergency vote again. One woman mentioned that several homeowners had started asking uncomfortable questions about delays. Another board member complained about rumors spreading within the community. Concerns about financial mismanagement, frustration over high HOA fees, and whispers about the expansion draining resources. The board tried to frame these issues as temporary setbacks, but their voices betrayed fear. The image of control they projected was crumbling. He moved away before they noticed him, walking deeper into the development. The weight of their collapsing confidence filled him with a quiet resolve. His next steps had to be handled with precision. He needed to increase the pressure gradually, enough to make the HOA falter, but not so rapidly that they detected the sort. That evening, he returned home and reviewed his evidence again, organizing files into categories. Illegal construction, financial misconduct, fraudulent land use claims, structural and safety deficiencies, contractor disputes, and unpaid invoices, internal conflict, and failing board operations. He also added a new section, County Inspection Vulnerabilities. He labeled each item carefully, imagining how they would unfold once the truth emerged. With the upcoming inspections and the HOA open house event soon approaching, the stage was nearly set. But the final piece of pressure came unexpectedly. Just after sunset, the landowner drove back toward the development one last time to observe the site in the quiet evening hours. As he approached the cul-de-sac, he slowed. Several cars were parked near one of the newly completed mansions. Through the wide windows, he could see silhouettes moving inside, an HOA board gathering, more formal than the earlier ones. He parked a distance away and stepped out, moving through the shadows until he could hear faint fragments of conversation drifting from the brightly lit interior. Their voices were strained. A man spoke sharply about financial projections failing. A woman expressed concerns about a pending loan approval that seemed uncertain. Someone mentioned a contractor threatening legal action over unpaid materials. Then came the line that confirmed everything he'd observed. If one more thing goes wrong, the entire project could collapse. Their fear was palpable. The HOA had become a pressure cooker, and they didn't realize the heat was being controlled by the very landowner they had wronged. He left quietly satisfied, The pressure was building rapidly, and soon the HOA would be forced into decisions that would seal their fate. Tomorrow, the first county inspection would take place, and when he arrived on site as the legal landowner, the HOA carefully constructed illusion would begin to shatter. The next chapter of the conflict was about to unfold, and the HOA had no idea what awaited. The morning of the county inspection arrived with a crispness that sharpened the senses. Sunlight glinted off the polished roofs of the mansions, gleaming like the false veneer of perfection the HOA had spent months creating. While the neighborhood appeared serene, the landowner knew the truth. This calm was temporary, fragile, and about to be shattered. He woke earlier than usual, double-checking his documentation, property surveys, maps, photographs, video footage of construction, and permits or lack thereof. Every detail was organized chronologically, every proof backed by official county records. He carried the knowledge that the county inspectors themselves would be blindsided once he revealed the true ownership of the land. This was not just an observation, it was a tactical strike timed for maximum effect. As he drove toward the development, he noted the traffic near the entrance. Buyers were arriving early for scheduled tours. Contractors were already moving vehicles and materials, trying to manage the daily chaos. And the HOA board, oblivious to his return, was moving in their usual confident, rehearsed patterns, unaware that the ground beneath their authority was shifting. He parked his truck a respectful distance from the first mansion scheduled for inspection. He walked slowly, surveying the area, confirming that inspectors had arrived on site. Uniformed county employees carried clipboards and measuring tools, discussing layout and compliance procedures as if evaluating a standard property. At that moment, the HOA board members began to arrive, unaware of his presence. They strode through the cul-de-sac, smiling at contractors and buyers alike, attempting to project control despite the brewing cracks he had observed over the last several days. When he finally approached the inspection site, he carried only a small binder and a calm demeanor, making him appear like a casual observer with a legitimate interest in the process. The inspectors greeted him politely, asking for identification. He presented his documents with quiet confidence. The papers clearly established that he was the legal owner of the land on which the homes were being inspected. The inspectors paused, scanning the documentation carefully. One of them murmured, "This changes things." And indeed, it did. Without confrontation, the landowner had shifted the balance of authority. The county had protocols for such circumstances. Inspectors were legally obligated to verify ownership before finalizing inspections or signing certifications. Homes that had been assumed compliant could now be placed on hold and future approvals delayed indefinitely. The HOA board noticed the landowner's presence and immediately stiffened. Their casual confidence evaporated into whispers of unease as they realized a new variable had entered the scene. They attempted to maintain composure, offering friendly greetings and feigned indifference. But the tension was palpable. He did not speak. He did not accuse. He merely positioned himself alongside the inspectors, quietly observing as they measured boundaries, checked property lines, and compared construction layouts with official maps. With each verification, the gap between the HOA claims and reality became painfully clear. Homes that were supposedly within HOA-owned land were, in fact, entirely on property that belonged to him. Roads carved through his acreage were mapped incorrectly. The clubhouse and common areas extended beyond the HOA legal boundaries. Even amenities like pools and tennis courts sat on land whose ownership had never been transferred. The inspectors took detailed notes, consulted internal guidelines, and made calls to their supervisors. The board members shifted nervously, whispering amongst themselves. Phones were checked. Emails were sent. All the while, the landowner stood back, documenting everything with his phone and camera. The first strike had been executed quietly, but its impact was immediate. The inspectors issued preliminary notices placing work and certifications on hold until ownership issues were resolved. Contractors were told to halt certain activities until legal authority could be confirmed. Buyers attending the tours were politely informed that some aspects of the property could not be finalized at the moment. Panic rippled subtly through the HOA board. They had always assumed that control was theirs, that no one could legally intervene at this stage. Yet here was a man, returned from a year of absence, calmly demonstrating that all of their authority rested on a house of cards. The board members moved closer to the inspectors, whispering urgently, trying to negotiate exceptions, offering promises of retroactive documentation and expedited payments. But the inspectors were firm. The law was clear. Ownership dictated authority, and right now the landowner controlled the land. No amount of lobbying could override this fact. By mid-morning, the inspectors had completed preliminary surveys but could not finalize approvals. Notices were posted on each home. Construction on private property without proper authorization. Contractors paused work, leaving equipment idle. So, homebuyers lingered, confused, and sales agents hurried to explain that certain legal matters were still pending. The HOA president, usually commanding and composed, now wore an expression of barely concealed panic. He walked the cul-de-sac repeatedly, speaking in hushed, rapid tones into his phone, making calls that no doubt tried to solve a problem that could not be fixed with money or persuasion alone. Other board members gathered in small clusters, their earlier confidence replaced by anxiety. Their most carefully laid plans were crumbling before them, and the reason was simple. They had built without authority on land they did not own. The landowner observed silently, recording video footage of every reaction, every frantic gesture, and every whispered conversation. These images and recordings were not just evidence. They were leverage. They would serve as proof of the board's reckless disregard for ownership and protocol, and as a means to negotiate terms entirely on his own conditions. As the day progressed, the HOA attempted to regroup. They called emergency meetings, held quick conferences with contractors, and sought legal counsel. Yet each decision was constrained by the underlying reality. They did not control the land. Each attempt to assert authority only highlighted their lack of legal standing. And every hour the inspections remained unresolved increased the pressure exponentially. Homebuyers became restless, contractors worried about payments, and the reputation of the HOA began to wobble under the weight of mounting scrutiny. By late afternoon, the first strike had done its work. The HO was forced to admit that the project was stalled, that permits could not be finalized, and that their entire operation now existed in legal limbo. They attempted to communicate with the landowner through indirect channels, trying to negotiate a quiet resolution. But he remained patient, silent, observing. The game had shifted. The advantage was no longer theoretical, it was concrete. The landowner held the ultimate leverage, and the HOA had no choice but to acknowledge it, whether publicly or privately. By sunset, he had returned to his vehicle, reviewing the footage he had collected. The first strike had been executed flawlessly. It had shaken the HOA confidence, exposed vulnerabilities, and forced their hand without a single confrontation or accusation. He understood that the coming days would require careful strategy to maintain the pressure and maximize his position. Yet in his heart, a quiet satisfaction settled over him. The long year of absence, the planning, the observation, it had all led to this moment. The HOA had built their proudest project on his land, and now they were beginning to realize that their triumph was built on their own mistake. Tomorrow would be the day to escalate further, to turn the pressure into undeniable control. And the HOA would have no idea it was coming. The next chapter of this unfolding drama would reveal just how far the landowner could push those who had dared to trespass on his property. The morning air carried a tension that seemed to cling to every surface of the development, and the landowner arrived early, moving quietly through the cul-de-sac with the calm precision of someone who understood exactly how fragile the HO position had become. The previous day's county inspection had shifted the balance irreversibly, and he could already sense the ripple of panic coursing through the board members. Contractors lingered on site with an uncharacteristic hesitation, unsure whether to proceed or pause, and the few homeowners who had taken possession of their mansions wandered cautiously, unaware that the legal foundation of their new lives was under siege. The landowner began by walking along the main driveway, photographing utility connections, retaining walls, and landscaping features while noting every deviation from the original boundaries he had meticulously documented. Each new observation reinforced the enormity of the HOA oversight. They had not merely built on his land. They had spent millions expanding their vision into a legal minefield they had no right to enter. As he moved closer to the central clubhouse, he noticed a gathering of board members clustered under the half-finished roof, their voices low but tense. The president paced back and forth, glancing nervously at documents in hand, and the vice president repeatedly gestured toward a laptop screen, clearly displaying financial projections that no longer added up. He stayed hidden, capturing every movement, every exchange, every sign of the stress that was now visibly cracking the facade of control the HOA had so carefully maintained. In a few moments, he realized they were debating whether to inform buyers and contractors about the county's hold on inspections, and whether to attempt last-minute retroactive permits to legitimize their construction. Their internal arguments revealed not only desperation but also a critical lack of planning. They had acted in haste, assuming authority that was never theirs, and now the consequences were manifesting in every decision and hesitation. He took note of their repeated references to emergency funds, unpaid contractors, and the looming possibility of lawsuits from buyers, mentally cataloging each point for later use. Walking further into the neighborhood, he observed signs of the pressure everywhere. Trucks left idling at the wrong locations, landscaping crews pausing mid-task to receive last-minute instructions, and a handful of sales agents wandering awkwardly, unsure how to reassure clients as the county inspectors moved about. His presence went unnoticed, which gave him a strategic advantage. He was no longer just observing, he was cataloging a dossier of chaos that could be leveraged in multiple directions. The landowner returned to the largest mansion, noting structural issues he had spotted previously and photographing drainage misalignments and minor foundation cracks. These defects, while small, were tangible evidence that the HOA reckless speed had compromised quality, providing him with additional leverage in any negotiation or legal proceedings. The combination of property ownership, ongoing inspections, and structural inconsistencies created a unique position from which he could control the narrative entirely. By late morning, he made his way to the partially completed clubhouse, where he noticed the board members consulting with a contractor over a series of newly discovered compliance issues. Their stress was amplified. They had assumed that the county inspections were routine, and now they were forced to confront the fact that every corner of the development had been executed without authority. Their sense of urgency grew, and they moved through the site at a hurried, almost panicked pace, checking measurements, photographs, and digital plans to attempt some semblance of control. He watched, silent and composed, as they debated calling an emergency meeting, sending legal representatives, and attempting to contact higher-level HOA officials, all while completely unaware that the landowner was actively documenting every exchange. The sheer arrogance of their prior behavior made it easy to predict the next series of mistakes they were about to make. He moved along the perimeter of the cul-de-sac, taking careful notes on how each home's footprint extended beyond their supposed property lines, recording video clips of areas where infrastructure, roads, lighting, and drainage had been installed without proper easements or permits. The exposure of these errors was inevitable once he chose to present them to the relevant authorities, and he relished the knowledge that the HOA would soon face consequences far beyond the inconvenience of halted inspections. By mid-afternoon, the first ripple of panic began to manifest more openly. Contractors approached board members with questions about payments and instructions. Sales agents whispered nervously about delays and confused buyers. Even a few residents who had taken early possession started asking subtle questions about property boundaries, notices from the county, and the legality of ongoing construction. The HOA, previously confident and brazen, now floundered under the weight of attention and mounting responsibilities they had ignored for far too long. The landowner observed all of this quietly, recording interactions and noting points of leverage that could be applied in negotiations. Each day of continued chaos strengthened his position. By late afternoon, he took a deliberate step. He approached the inspectors, presenting additional documentation that highlighted minor deviations from the approved boundaries in multiple areas. The inspectors listened carefully, verified the information, and updated their preliminary findings. Construction in certain areas was temporarily paused, and homeowners and contractors were notified. The effect on the HOA was immediate. The board members, already strained by the first day of inspection, now faced the realization that delays would compound, costs would escalate, and the project's credibility would continue to erode. They exchanged panicked glances, muttered urgent instructions, and attempted to regain control, but the landowner had engineered the situation so that every move they made only tightened the net around them. By evening, the neighborhood had taken on a strange, uneasy quiet. The landowner walked slowly through the cul-de-sac one last time, surveying the empty roads, halted construction, and partially completed mansions. He knew the pressure was building. The HOA confidence was shattered, and their ability to act independently was compromised. He also recognized that the community, buyers, contractors, and even casual onlookers had begun to sense instability. Each delayed inspection, each halted construction crew, each hesitant board member contributed to a growing perception that the project was precarious. He returned to his vehicle with a profound sense of satisfaction. The first strike had disrupted the HOA illusion of control. The second strike, his strategic intervention through inspectors and documentation, had tightened the leverage to the point where the board's autonomy was effectively constrained. And the final moves, he knew, would come in a matter of days when financial, legal, and social pressures intersected in a way that left the HOA no path forward except to meet his terms. Sitting in his truck reviewing the day's photographs, videos, and notes, he realized the plan was unfolding precisely as intended. Each piece of evidence, each action, each pause in construction contributed to a slow but unstoppable crescendo. The HOA, having built their empire on stolen ground, was now trapped in a situation they had never anticipated. And he, the landowner who had returned quietly, patiently, and strategically, was in complete control. Tomorrow would bring the next stage of escalation. Negotiations, financial leverage, and the beginning of a reality the board could neither ignore nor escape. The game had shifted entirely, and the HOA had no idea that their proudest project was now the very thing that would secure his victory. The unseen advantage had transformed into a tangible power, and the landowner knew with certainty that the final chapter of their reckoning was approaching. The stage was set for the ultimate reveal, and the HOA's own overreach would be their undoing. The day of reckoning arrived with a quiet inevitability, as if the entire neighborhood itself held its breath in anticipation of the coming storm. The landowner moved through the cul-de-sac early in the morning, his presence calm yet purposeful, fully aware that the HOA fragile control had reached a tipping point. Contractors were already on site, but their movements were hesitant, weighed down by halted projects, paused payments, and uncertain instructions. Homebuyers wandered cautiously, observing construction sites left in limbo, their excitement tempered by the sudden reality of stalled progress. The board members arrived shortly after sunrise, attempting to maintain a facade of composure that had long since cracked. Their hurried glances and whispered conversations betrayed the panic they had tried so desperately to conceal in previous days. They were fully aware of the landowner's legal claim now, but they still underestimated the scope of leverage he wielded. As he walked among the mansions, he began systematically documenting every aspect of the HOA predicament. Unpermitted constructional deviations, halted inspections, and signs of financial strain in the form of delayed deliveries, abandoned equipment, and half-completed landscaping. Each photograph and video clip served as a record of the chaos that had grown entirely from the HOA's own overreach. By mid-morning, he approached the clubhouse, where the board had convened an emergency meeting in the unfinished interior. Their energy was frenetic, a mixture of frustration and desperation. They pored over financial statements, loan documents, and contractor reports, but every line of calculation reinforced a simple truth they had long ignored. They had spent millions on land they did not legally own. Even with borrowed funds, emergency reserves, and projected sales, the entire project teetered on the edge of collapse. He did not interrupt or confront them directly. Instead, he observed silently, recording everything with a meticulous eye, knowing that these recordings would provide leverage that no verbal argument or threat could rival. Their own words, spoken in panic and frustration, became evidence of negligence, poor planning, and misrepresentation. The inspectors arrived soon after, moving with authority to verify the landowner's claims. Each step confirmed the boundaries, highlighting multiple discrepancies between HOA assertions and legal documentation. Work on certain homes was formally halted, and the inspectors issued directives requiring immediate clarification from the HOA. Contractors stood idle, unsure of how to proceed, and board members scrambled to coordinate responses, but every plan was constrained by the legal reality he now controlled. Or then, as noon approached, the landowner initiated the next stage of his strategy. Using his documented evidence, he contacted the HOA president directly, requesting a private meeting on his terms. The board, fearful and increasingly desperate, agreed. The meeting took place on the partially completed clubhouse grounds, a neutral but symbolically powerful location where the power dynamic could not be ignored. The landowner presented a clear and unassailable position. The land belonged to him. The construction had been carried out without permission, and continued development would constitute trespass, legal action, and potential financial ruin for the HOA. The evidence he displayed, survey maps, photographs, video recordings, county notices, and detailed records of ongoing violations, was comprehensive and undeniable. The board members listened in stunned silence. Their prior arrogance, the countless meetings where they had dismissed ownership boundaries, the rapid expansion they had pursued without consultation, they all now worked against them. They realized that the entire empire they had built rested on sand, and that every day of delay, every unpermitted construction, and every dollar spent without legal right compounded their liability. The landowner remained calm, methodical, and measured in his approach. He outlined terms: continued use of the properties under a formal lease agreement, monthly rent paid directly to him, reimbursement for past expenses incurred on his land, and strict compliance with county inspections moving forward. He emphasized that these terms were fair, considering the HOA's blatant misappropriation of his property and the legal leverage he now held. The board's panic gradually shifted into reluctant negotiation. Each member understood that any attempt to resist would trigger lawsuits, fines, and possible demolition orders that could destroy the entire development. Their projected profits, public image, and personal reputations were all at stake. One by one, they conceded, agreeing to a formal lease arrangement and immediate corrective action to ensure compliance with legal requirements. By early afternoon, agreements were drafted, signed, and witnessed, cementing the landowner's victory. Contractors resumed work under new guidance. Inspections continued with proper legal oversight, and buyers were reassured that the development would proceed legitimately. The landowner had transformed the HOA reckless overreach into a structured, controlled arrangement that rewarded him for their previous audacity. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns and towering mansions, he walked through the neighborhood once more. The environment was now orderly, compliant, and under his indirect authority. Board members moved with cautious respect, contractors worked under clear instructions, and buyers experienced the sense of stability the HOA had previously promised but failed to deliver. Every step of the day had reinforced a single truth: the HOA hubris had placed them entirely at his mercy, and he had executed his strategy with patience, precision, and calm authority. By evening, he returned home and reviewed the day's events. The legal agreements, photographs, video records, and formal lease documents provided him with total control over the properties built on his land. The HOA, once arrogant and dismissive, now operated under his rules, paying rent monthly, adhering strictly to county regulations, and maintaining full accountability for the property they had trespassed upon. It was a complete reversal of power. The neighborhood that had seemed lost to overreach and illegal expansion was now stable, profitable for him, and legally secure. The landowner reflected on the year he had spent away, the planning, the observation, and the strategic patience that had brought him to this moment. He realized that absence had been his greatest tool, giving the HOA freedom to overextend themselves and exposing every flaw in their arrogance. By returning at the perfect moment, armed with knowledge, documentation, and tactical patience, he had transformed a potential disaster into an unparalleled victory. The evening air settled over the development as he walked along the quiet cul-de-sac one final time. Each mansion, each road, each landscape area was now a testament not to the HOA ambition, but to the landowner's strategy, patience, and unwavering understanding of leverage. The final realization was clear. Pride, arrogance, and overreach had brought the HOA to their knees, and in doing so, they had secured him an enduring position of power, respect, and revenue. The development, once a symbol of the HOA audacity, was now a monument to his quiet return and deliberate triumph. And as he drove home, the neighborhood fading in the rearview mirror, he knew that the story would ripple through the community for years. An example of what happens when hubris ignores reality and patience meets opportunity with precision. The HOA had learned finally and irrevocably that power is meaningless without legal foundation, and the landowner had ensured that his foundation would never be challenged again.